My life has always been ordinary. I live in a small town called Woodridge, Virginia. Every day I walk to work at the local grocery store, which is just a mile from my house. It's a simple and predictable route that I've walked for years. Life here is peaceful, people are friendly, and I never thought anything extraordinary could happen to me. One evening was no different from the others. After my shift ended, I began my usual walk home. The forest surrounding the road was always quiet and calm. But that evening was different. I heard strange, high-pitched laughter coming from somewhere deep in the forest. It was so unexpected and unnatural that I froze for a moment. However, the sound of birds taking off into the air distracted me, and I didn't give it much thought. The next morning, on my way to work, I noticed something on the side of the road. It was a glove, but not an ordinary one. A clown glove, brightly colored with a big red nose on one finger. I picked it up and decided to take it with me to show my colleagues. At work, everyone laughed when they saw it. No one could imagine how it ended up there, in the middle of the forest. "Probably some kid's party," joked my colleague John. We laughed, but inside I felt a strange sense of unease. That evening on my way home, I heard the same laughter again. But this time, it was closer. My heart started beating faster, and I quickened my pace. And then, on the side of the road, I noticed a figure. At first, I thought it was some animal, but as I got closer, I realized it wasn't an animal. It was a clown. His bright costume stood out against the darkness. He stood completely still, staring straight at me. I felt uneasy. I stopped and felt a cold sweat on my forehead. The clown started approaching, and his voice cut through the silence. "Give me back my glove or give me your hand," he said, pulling something that looked like an axe from behind his back. I didn't know what to do. Panic gripped me. I started running, hearing the clown with the axe chasing after me. His laughter echoed in my ears, and my heart was pounding like crazy. I was nearing my house when I saw the headlights of a police car. I waved my arms, hoping the driver would see me. The police car stopped, and I burst into words of relief, explaining that a clown had attacked me. The officer listened to me and began searching, but the clown had disappeared. The next day, I found out that this wasn't the only case. Similar incidents had happened to other people in our town. They talked about clowns chasing them in the dark. This led to thoughts about the existence of some kind of clown cult that scares and pursues people. This event changed me forever. I no longer walked that way and always felt fear in the dark and clowns. Every time I hear laughter, panic overwhelms me. Sometimes I see those bright gloves in my dreams, turning into horrible nightmares. A month passed since that evening, but the fear stayed with me. I noticed that I spent more time at home and went out less. Woodridge no longer felt as safe as it used to. The locals started talking about the events and installing more lights on the roads, but the fear remained. I started researching the history of our town. It turned out that several decades ago, there really was a circus that toured all over the state. But one night, a fire took the lives of many circus performers, including the famous clown Ronald. The locals remembered him as a very strange person who had many secrets. They said that after his death, many people heard strange laughter in the forest, but no one gave it much thought. I realized this might be connected. Perhaps Ronald's spirit never left this place. This thought terrified me even more, but at the same time, I felt I had to understand the truth. One evening, I decided to return to the same place where I met the clown. I took a flashlight and a knife with me, just in case. The forest seemed even scarier at night. I walked, listening to every sound, and then I heard the laughter again. It was even closer than before. I felt my heart race. I saw him, the clown standing in the middle of the road. He didn't move, just stared at me with his piercing eyes. I gathered all my courage and walked closer. "What do you want from me?" I shouted. The clown didn't answer. He just smiled, holding his axe. I felt I couldn't stay here any longer. I started backing away and then ran. The laughter echoed behind me, but I didn't look back. This event changed me forever. I could no longer live in Woodridge. I moved to another city, trying to forget that horrible evening. But the memories stayed with me. Every time I hear laughter, panic overwhelms me. Sometimes I feel I see the shadow of that clown in my dreams, and there's no escaping it. This story keeps me on edge every time I remember it. Those clowns, that laughter, those horrible nights, it all became part of my life, and I don't know if I will ever be free from this fear. Maybe it's just the beginning. Maybe they will return. But one thing I know for sure, I will never be the same again. When I was a child, I had one phobia that haunted me for years: a fear of clowns. This fear started when I was just 5 years old. I remember that day as if it were yesterday. My parents and I went to a local circus where I saw a clown for the first time. His face was white, his eyes surrounded by black circles, and his smile seemed to stretch from ear to ear. This terrifying image etched itself into my memory forever. Years passed, but the fear of clowns remained. I tried to avoid any events where they might be present. But one evening during summer vacation, everything changed. I decided to ride my bike around my neighborhood. It was a warm summer evening, and I was enjoying the fresh air and quiet. The streets were almost empty, and I pedaled leisurely, not suspecting that this evening would become one of the most horrifying of my life. Suddenly I saw him. He stood on the side of the road, staring straight at me. It was a clown, but he looked more like a mime. His face was covered in white paint, and his eyes looked cold and emotionless. He was silent, but made strange movements that made my heart beat faster. I nervously smiled and continued on my way, trying not to pay attention to the strange figure. But soon I felt like someone was following me. I turned around but saw no one. This feeling didn't leave me, and I decided to go home. As I approached my house, I heard footsteps behind me but saw no one again. When I was already near my yard, I saw him. The clown was hiding in the neighbor's bushes, looking straight at me. My heart started beating even faster, and I quickly went inside, locking the door behind me. I told my parents everything, but when they went outside, the clown was gone. He had disappeared as suddenly as he had appeared. My parents tried to calm me down, saying that maybe it was just someone playing a prank, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of fear. The next day, I didn't leave the house, afraid of encountering the clown again. I often looked out the window, expecting to see his figure in the bushes or on the road. I was scared even during the day, not to mention at night. A few days later, at night, I woke up to a light tapping on my window. It was very strange because my room is on the second floor. Scared, I slowly approached the window and saw him. The same clown was standing in the middle of the road, looking straight into my window. His eyes gleamed in the moonlight, and that horrifying smile was on his face. I quickly jumped into bed and completely wrapped myself in the blanket. Under the blanket, I heard a faint laugh coming from the street. This sound chilled me to the bone. I tried to fall asleep, but this laughter haunted me even in my dreams. The next morning, I told my parents about the clown again, but they didn't find any traces of his presence. They started thinking it was just my imagination, but I knew it wasn't. The clown was real, and he was following me. I decided never to go out for night rides again. However, the feeling that the clown was stalking me never left. I even started avoiding going out during the day. At school, I constantly looked around, expecting to see that clown. My friends began to notice that something was wrong with me, but I couldn't explain anything to them. A few days later, I started seeing him everywhere. He appeared in the windows of neighboring houses, stood on the street when I walked to school, and once I even saw him in the school corridor. He stood in a corner, silently looking at me. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but it felt too real. One evening, as I was sitting in my room, I heard a strange noise downstairs. It was a soft tapping, like someone knocking on the door, I went to see who it was, but there was no one on the doorstep. Only a light breeze stirred the bushes in the yard. I felt that fear again, the fear of being followed. After that incident, I never saw the clown again, but the fear of him stayed with me for life. Even as an adult, I often wake up at night, feeling like someone is watching me from the darkness. Maybe it's just my imagination, but that fear I felt then has stayed with me forever. Now, when I look back on my childhood, I understand that fear can have a powerful hold on us. It can change our lives, making us more cautious and alert. But sometimes this fear can also become our enemy, making us see things that don't actually exist. Was that clown real? Was it just my imagination? I'll never know the truth. But one thing I know for sure, that clown will forever remain a part of my most terrifying memories. My name is Mike, and this story is the scariest moment of my life, which still haunts me. I work in a small circus in New Jersey, where we travel from town to town, putting on our shows. My job involves handling the technical aspects of the show, lights, sound, and scenery. All of it falls to me. But one day, something happened that turned my life upside down. Our circus stopped in a small town called Freeville. We set up our tents on an old, abandoned lot. The place looked pretty creepy even during the day, but we had no choice. We needed to keep the shows going. One evening, while I was working on setting up the lighting for the next show, a local resident, an old man named Harold, approached me. He was eccentric and had a barely audible whisper when he spoke. Harold warned me that this lot had a dark history. He told me that many years ago, another circus had performed here, and there was a clown named Chuckles who disappeared under mysterious circumstances after a series of brutal murders in the town. I smiled and waved off his story, thinking it was just an old local legend. But that evening, when everyone else had gone to sleep, I decided to check out the old abandoned wagon left behind by that circus. Inside, I found nothing but dirt and dust, but one thing caught my eye: a worn, ruined painting of a clown. His eyes seemed to be staring right at you. I took the painting and hung it in my room in the circus wagon, just as a souvenir. However, from that moment on, strange things started to happen. At first, I heard odd noises at night, like someone laughing near my wagon. Then I noticed that things in the wagon were moving by themselves. I chalked it up to fatigue and my imagination. One evening, when I returned to the wagon after a hard day's work, I noticed that the clown painting had changed. Now he had a more sinister smile and his eyes were filled with hatred. I felt uneasy and decided to get rid of the painting the next day. But that night, everything changed. I woke up to a horrifying laugh that sounded right in my ear. I opened my eyes and saw that the clown painting was now hanging directly above my bed, although I clearly remembered leaving it on the other wall. The clown in the painting was no longer just an image. He started to move. His hand slowly rose and pointed at me, while his mouth continued to emit a chilling laugh. I jumped out of bed and rushed to the door, but it was locked from the inside. I heard the clown laughing louder and louder, and then the light went out. In the darkness, I felt something cold touch my hand. I turned around and saw the clown standing right in front of me, his face twisted with hatred and malevolent joy. I screamed, trying to find a way out, but felt his hands pulling me back. I remember losing consciousness from fear. When I came to, it was already daytime. I was lying on the floor of the wagon, drenched in sweat. The clown painting hung in its place, but now it was completely empty. I decided to immediately tell the circus director about all this, but when I came to him, he just smiled and said that old lots always had their legends. However, that evening, one of our performers disappeared. He was nowhere to be found, and we didn't find any traces. This incident repeated with other troupe members, and I realized that something had to be done immediately. I decided to get rid of the painting once and for all. I took it and went to the nearest lake to throw it into the water. But standing on the shore, I felt something invisible holding me back. I saw the clown's face appear in the water, and he laughed again. Summoning all my strength, I threw the painting into the lake and ran back to the circus. When I returned, the wagon was in flames. The fire consumed everything, and I understood that this was the end. After that night, I left the circus and moved to another state. I try to forget that horrifying laugh and the clown's terrifying face, but he haunts me in my dreams. I tell this story as a warning to anyone who comes to Freeville. Never take anything from abandoned places, especially if it looks like it wants you to find it. Sometime later, after I moved to another state, I began to feel like it was all just a terrible dream, a figment of my stressed mind. I found a job in another circus, hoping to start a new life. But my hopes were shattered right after the first performance. It was an ordinary evening. I was setting up the lights and sound for the show when I heard a familiar laugh. It came from the shadows behind the stage. My heart began to race. I started searching for the source of the sound but found nothing but darkness. Then I thought it was just my imagination. However, with each passing day, the laughter grew louder and more frequent. It echoed at night, disturbing my sleep and my work. I began to notice that things were moving by themselves again. One day, I found an old red clown noseball in my wagon. I had no doubt it was him, Chuckles. My colleagues began to notice that I had changed. I became nervous and easily irritated. They tried to help me, but I couldn't explain what was happening. How could I tell them about being haunted by a ruined painting? One evening, when I heard the chilling laughter again, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I packed my things and decided to drive far away from the circus, away from everything. I got in the car and started driving with no set destination, just to get away from this nightmare. But even on the road, the laughter continued to haunt me. It came from the radio, reflected in the rear-view mirrors. I felt that Chuckles was always nearby, invisible, but always present. My last resort was to seek help from a psychiatrist. I hoped that professional help would rid me of this nightmare. Dr. Smith, whom I turned to, listened to my story attentively. He assured me that such hallucinations could be a result of severe stress and fatigue. He prescribed me tranquilizers and recommended a course of therapy. For a while, I really felt better. The laughter disappeared, and I began to think it was all just a product of my troubled imagination. But one day, when I returned home after a therapy session, I found a small painting on my table. It was him, Chuckles. His eyes were staring at me again, and the smile was even more sinister than before. This time I realized there was no escape. Chuckles was with me forever. He was a part of me, my personal nightmare that would never end. I can no longer live a normal life. Every evening I hear his laughter, see his face in reflections, feel his presence. I am writing this story as a final warning to everyone. If you ever see an old, ruined painting of a clown, leave it where it is. Do not take it with you. Otherwise, he will come for you. He will always find you.